Welcome back to Real Florida Magazine.
Welcome back here today on the beautiful campus of Florida Panhandle Technical College in our series of community awareness. Here today with us today is Sunshine Speers from Emerald Coast Hospice. November is Hospice Awareness Month, and we thought that it would be a good idea to have Sunshine back. She was recently on the show talking about one of their upcoming events, and we sort of touched briefly on what is hospice. Since that time, we got a boatload of emails and a couple of phone calls, so we called Sunshine and said, you know, let's do an entire show on what exactly is hospice and what can people expect. And I think that you'll agree that this is one that's not only timely, but certainly can be educational. Hopefully you'll learn something from this show, just like I do with every show, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. As mentioned, our guest today is Sunshine Speers with Emerald Coast Hospice. As I mentioned in the introduction, following your last appearance, a lot of people said, hey, can you talk more about what is hospice? So often, at least in my recollection, Sunshine, hospice was always looked upon as that guy with the hood and the sigh walking along. You know, it was only for people who had not much time left. As we touched upon briefly when you were here before, that couldn't be less true. It's actually can add to the quality of life and then sometimes even discharge people from that hospice. So, that all said, let's start at the very beginning. For those of our viewers who haven't seen you before, what do you do with Emerald Coast Hospice? What is your position, and why is it that you're here talking about hospice with us today?
Okay. Well, my name is Sunshine Speers. I'm a registered nurse. I've been with Emerald Coast Hospice for a little over a year. I was a case manager working out in the field with our patients, and I am now the hospice admissions education specialist. So I have the opportunity to go and talk to different senior groups and facilities and communities to talk about hospice and what they do and cover different areas of concern where grief and depression and things associated with death and dying.
And it's interesting that it would warrant a full-time position, in this case you, to do just that. That's how much maybe misinformation, non-information that there is, or misconceptions about what hospice actually is. Mm-hmm. All that said, many people just are unaware of hospice until they need those services. It would seem that a little bit of pre-education would actually be good, because I would imagine some people don't get hospice care until beyond the point where they probably should have, which maybe would have added to that quality of life. Let's talk about hospice from that aspect holistically and the benefits of hospice, and again, how maybe that little bit of knowledge would have helped them. Okay,
absolutely. And you know, just like with anything in healthcare, being proactive and being aware of what our options are, and knowing, you know, when it comes to taking care of ourselves, having knowledge alleviates a lot of fear. So when it comes to hospice, it's my job and job of many others with hospice to make sure that people understand what their options are. A lot of people don't understand exactly what hospice is. So Hospice 101 is kind of what we're going to talk a little bit about today, and our philosophy in regards to taking care of people.
You've got the floor.
All right. Well, when it comes to hospice, obviously there has to be a philosophy. You know, for every healthcare organization or every company, obviously there is a philosophy. What are we trying to accomplish? Hospice is a life-affirming benefit. When it comes to supporting persons, whether it be the person who has a disease or the caregivers that come in and take care of them, and also understanding that hospice neither hastens nor postpones death. You know, a lot of people, as you said, they have the stigma associated with hospice that, you know, as soon as when hospice comes in, that means that, you know, we're going to be dying soon. And that is, as you said, it could not be further from the truth. You know, there are cases where patients come in under hospice services because there is nothing else that can be done for them. And oftentimes, you're looking at diseases like cancer, and the patient has exhausted treatment measures. And those people have waited a long time to be able to accept the services so that they could have a quality of life for what they have with the time that they may have left. But there are many diseases that are chronic, and that if the physician determines in the next 6 months there's a potential this disease takes its normal course, that that could be someone passing. But it's our job to make sure that person has quality of life during that time, no matter how long it is.
And everything that you say is going to spur 2 or 3 more questions with me, I know. Hospice is something that needs to be prescribed, is that correct?
Yes, you do have to have your physician, just like if you were going to home health or you're any kind of medical equipment or prescription medication of any sort. We do have to have a physician say that, a physician's order to begin services under hospice, absolutely.
And I would presume that hospice services are covered by insurance as long as they are prescribed and as long as they fit certain guidelines.
Yes, Medicare, Medicaid, and we accept any insurance that has a hospice benefit. That's very important that a lot of people don't understand. If you have an insurance outside of Medicare or Medicaid, you need to look at your insurance policy to make sure that it has a hospice benefit associated with it sooner rather than later.
Is that something that comes standard with most extended healthcare insurance packages, or is that something that you may want to ask your insurance man about?
As far as I know, it's not as common as it should be. So it does need to be looked into, and I would definitely ask questions about your policies.
Yeah, and one other thing before you continue. I know that hospice, because of the fact that I've spoken to you and other members of your organization, gives some quality to the days that remain. Is it possible that we could also paint it as a way to die with dignity?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When it comes to knowing what hospice is and understanding that we focus on a palliative rather than curative service, I know the word palliative, a lot of people don't quite grasp what that means, but essentially we're not going into a home telling a patient, okay, you've got to get up, you've got to do therapy, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, when all they really want to do is be there with their family and be comfortable and do what it is that they enjoy doing every day. And so it's our job to support the wishes of the patients and the caregivers and make sure that they get whatever it is that they need to have quality of life.
And again, it is so that they do have as much quality of life as possible within their situation.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
And as you mentioning the benefits, we have a lot of veterans. It is, obviously we have Veterans Day coming up, and it is a good idea to remember that we do have a lot of veterans who receive hospice services as well, and we work closely with the veterans benefits to make sure that those patients get what they need. Oftentimes people have questions, does that mean I can't get my prescriptions mail order anymore? Absolutely not. We work with the VA to make sure that those prescriptions still come the mail order if that's what the patient prefers.
You give a talk, a presentation similar to what we're doing right now to large groups of people and to many groups of people throughout the year. What are some of the most common questions? What are some of the most common misconceptions? Or when you sit down in front of a group of people, most of whom have not dealt with hospice, don't really know, what are the most common questions?
Can I keep my doctor? That's often, you tell me you have medical directors that work for you. And we do. We have 3 medical directors that work to assist us, and because we meet weekly and talk about our patients. Does that mean my doctor won't be involved anymore? Absolutely not. The physicians that originally refer and your regular physician stays involved as he would like and as you would like him to. So our nurses communicate often with the primary care physician. We have our medical directors as an added benefit because, at 2 a.m., whenever we've got a patient who needs a medication, whether they're having anxiety or pain or something that is difficult to control and they don't want to go to the hospital, we have the ability to call our medical directors and get what that patient needs without them having to go to the hospital. But again, knowing that primary care physician is still very, very involved.
Yeah, so if you've been going to a doctor, you've had the diagnosis of cancer, you've got a prognosis of not too good, you know that things are kind of going south for you, you're under hospice care. I guess that maybe sometimes those of us who have not dealt with it don't realize that it's not like that doctor's signing off on you and there's nothing more that they can do. Obviously, there's still pain meds. There's still prescriptions for rehabilitative devices, whether it's a wheelchair or something like. So that doctor still has. Do you find that most of the time that doctor wants to be engaged as part of that process, or what's the normal course of action?
In most cases they do, and a lot of them will say, "We trust you. We understand that this is the area that you work best in, that you work with us day in and day out." If it's an internal medicine physician. And their focus is curative, they may not feel as comfortable dealing with the palliative avenue. So they'll say, I want to be involved, I want to know what's going on, but I trust that you guys are doing what's best for my patient. And oftentimes the patients are agreeable to that as well.
I would imagine that hospice has been around enough years, and has proven itself so that most physicians would probably not just understand it, but embrace it and realize the place that hospice plays in that life experience?
Well, unfortunately, there are a lot of physicians who don't quite understand what hospice can do. There are a lot that do, and there are a lot that trust us and what, and understand what we do. But there are a lot of physicians who unfortunately aren't extremely comfortable with the death and dying process, or knowing exactly, and that's, again, just depends on the physician, but they're always supportive. But they'll say to us, I don't know, that's not quite, how I'm comfortable with, or what I'm comfortable with. So it's kind of a 50-50, I'd say.
And again, I'm just stretching here, but oncologists specifically should be aware and embrace hospice. Is that a fair
Absolutely,
statement?
yes.
Whereas a pediatrician, how often, unfortunately, do we have to deal with a pediatric situation? Right. So I would imagine they not so much.
Absolutely.
So I would imagine the type of medicine and the reason that person was seeing that doctor would have a lot to go toward the hospice embracing.
Absolutely. And as we were saying, misconceptions regarding hospice. Hospice is not just for the elderly. There are, unfortunately, a number of diseases out there that take people at any point in their life, or progressive diseases, I should say. So yeah, there are a lot of people who don't quite understand, and physicians included, if it's not something that they've done and dealt with very much. Some other misconceptions would be that that your Medicare only covers 6 months. So as we talked about earlier, having the diagnosis of 6 months or less, because your physician had said, if this disease takes its course as it normally would, then there's a good possibility the next 6 months that the person may pass. Does that mean after that 6-month period you no longer qualify for hospice services? No, absolutely not. We have a process. When we show Medicare that this person has had a continued decline, we have nurse practitioners that go into the patient's homes or whatever setting the patient's in, and they do what they call a face-to-face evaluation. And because of that documentation, it supports their continued need for hospice services, and the Medicare continues to cover it.
Yeah, that would almost be some black humor where somebody's living longer than that they were originally slated to, and in an imperfect world, that hospice would be pulled away due to insurance coverage, and here they are out there all by themselves again. So it makes sense that, and it's nice to know that the insurance companies embrace the fact that not everybody's the same, and that sometimes treatment's going to take longer.
Yeah, and when we're dealing with a patient with, say, COPD, or which is a progressive disease, many times how they end up on hospice is because that patient has had so many episodes of ending up in the hospital, and the medications that they're taking, they don't completely understand what medication they need to take at what time. The families get, they're fearful, they don't know what to do, so they end up at the emergency room. And when hospice comes on board and we're able to get those symptoms managed, the patients physically start to improve somewhat, as well as mentally improve. Fear drives us, and it determines a lot about what we do. And when you've got an added support system in there, and someone you can call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you've got that oxygen there that which hospice helps provide, you don't have that sudden need to go to the hospital when you start getting anxious and you can't breathe. So it definitely does, in a lot of ways, improve people. I actually had a patient we'd had on hospice services for quite a few years with COPD, and we had to discharge her from our services, and of course she was not very happy about it, because she genuinely loved the services and our health aides that would have come out and help her with her bath, and she said, I can't believe you're firing me. But as I explained to her, it's a good thing, because you understand now how to cope with your disease, and you're not at the point where you need us anymore. It became chronic versus terminal at that point. So.
Well, and I would imagine that there's situations where, especially when it deals with the mental faculties of that patient, where they are taking medicines which are counterindicative, that they're being prescribed, they're going to multiple doctors, not letting doctors know that they've already seen a doctor. And so the hospice worker, and correct me if I'm wrong, would be that outside, that third party, that set of eyes that can say, wait a minute now, you're taking this and you're taking this, that's going to be bad for you. That's, I think, maybe where that being discharged from hospice comes in, because you reestablish that quality of life, realizing if they stick with this new plan, they probably don't have the problems they thought they had. Would that be correct?
Absolutely, and it is quite alarming, the number of people that see at least 5 or more physicians. And when you look at how many times they have to go to a doctor's appointment, when they're going to a doctor's appointment 2 and 3 times a week, number one, it's exhausting for the patient, the family, and all those involved. And you do have multiple medications that you're taking, and if you are not extremely certain why you're taking a medicine, you may not feel the need to communicate that to the other doctors you're seeing. And despite how hard we try, medical records aren't always accurate. And so when you have a nurse in there, they're able to look at that whole group of medications that patient's taking, and they're able to eliminate some of those that are possibly not necessary or duplicates, and help them understand, hey, this is what you need to take when this happens. This medicine's for this. And they can spend that time with the patient and family, so that those number one, the need to go to all those physicians' appointments have decreased greatly, and we're able to just focus in on that disease and what it's doing to the person, and treat those symptoms, and it works. It really does. I mean, it helps decrease that.
When I was in country radio, we did the St. Jude's Cancer Research Hospital fundraiser every year, and that's something country music embraces. Mm-hmm. And we went to the Ronald McDonald House in Memphis, and we went to the hospital up there. And the number of young children who had diseases with names this long, who could say those names and could tell you, yeah, I'm going to die in about 4 months. And they were totally, if not good, they were totally knew what was going on. I guess when you have it at that young age, you've got that innocence. My question, though, from all that is, how often do we see those pediatric situations where they're on hospice compared to adults?
Fortunately, we don't see them as often as you would in bigger areas. There have been instances. Now, as far as our hospice services are concerned, don't quote me, I believe it's 18 or older for our services, but there are certain services that are provided to younger people. But personally, I've not experienced that. So I couldn't really speak well on that, but I can tell you that it does exist. It's just not as common in this area.
And we're talking about some of the misconceptions and some of the questions that you get. Are there others that stand out?
A lot of people perceive it as giving up hope. They believe that if they accept services from hospice, that's like them saying that there's no hope that they're going to get better. And that's difficult. And as I said before, fear drives us in the unknown and not knowing what to expect. And because we have such a great group of individuals when it comes to our nurses, our health aides, our chaplains, our social workers, and our volunteers, we're able to help people better understand what they can expect if the disease does this, or if it does this. No two people are alike. So it's our job to reevaluate once those times come up that are uncommon. But a lot of people just still have that feeling that, hey, that's like me saying when I signed that paper that I'm not ever going to get better.
Yeah, that person who's afraid to go to the doctor or afraid to go to the dentist, mm-hmm. because they're going to find out that there's something wrong with them that is therefore going to cause pain, or the perception of that. Same thing. Do you find that people have been told by their physician, we need to look into hospice, and then don't do just that because they don't want to accept? Absolutely.
And I'll kind of give you an example. We did the food drive in August. And I was absolutely amazed at the number of people who had made it a point to come up to me and say, we were so fearful of what to expect when hospice came on board. We put it off. We procrastinated. Our doctor mentioned to us several times. And this one lady stands out in my mind. She made it a point to come all the way across the parking lot, and she saw our sign, and she said, I just wanted to tell you thank you for what you guys have done. And now obviously she's speaking for what our company and what our case managers and nurses have done, not me personally. But she said, my father-in-law was sick for a very long time. He had a progressive disease. I believe it was COPD. And our doctor had told us that he thought it would be a good idea for us to get on hospice services. And we procrastinated on making that decision. We put it off, and we back and forth to the hospital and the emergency room. And finally it was to the point where the doctor said, there's really nothing else I can do for you except put you on a ventilator, which the patient knew that was obviously not something that he wanted to have done. So they did reluctantly accept hospice services. And she almost became to the point where she was tearful. She said, because I feel like we let him down, because what we got in, I believe it was 3 weeks after hospice came in that 3 weeks, we realized we could have gotten that so much longer. We could have been able to give him so much more if we had just not if we had accepted services, if we had looked into it more, if we had listened more. She said, and what we got in that 3 weeks was amazing. She said, we felt like, it was the best thing we could have ever done for him. In hindsight, it's 2020, what you see. She said, but when her mother got sick several years later, I believe her mother had congestive heart failure, and the doctor told her that he felt like she might qualify. She said, we did not even bat an eye. We didn't skip a beat. She said, we knew that that's where we wanted to be. We knew that that's what she needed. We knew that Emerald Coast Hospice could provide for her what she needed and provide for us as a family. And she said, we never looked back. And she said it was the best experience. And her mother lived on, I believe, about a year. But it was just kind of eye-opening for me, for someone who can tell me they've been on both sides of the fence. They've seen what it's like to procrastinate it, and then also accept it readily, and to know how it benefited them.
Yeah, it seems like some of those testimonials of family members or patients themselves would be beneficial. But I also understand you have HIPAA and you have confidentiality and all that. But it would seem like some of that would really be the tell. But go on. Okay.
All right. Well, and just talking a little bit about goals, when it comes to palliative versus curative, a lot of people would make the assumption that we don't have goals because we're not trying to work you back towards walking 10 or 15 feet or trying to get you back and forth to the bathroom by yourself or using this walker. But our goals are more driven toward what the patient needs and wants to have a better quality of life. They're driven toward helping the family understand what they can expect and helping them cope with the idea that this disease is going to take its natural course, whether it's 6 months, whether it's a year. So it is important to understand that we do have goals where hospice is concerned, and those goals can change at any given time. We have a Dream Foundation that we're able to provide certain things for our patients and request. And I personally had a patient on my caseload who lived locally, and he had not had a chance to meet his grandchildren, and he had not had really a chance to see his son in probably about 30 years. Wow. And they lived in Kansas. And the Dream Foundation was able to help him get a trip. We were able to coordinate with his oxygen and all the things that he needed. And I'm happy to say that he made the decision to move to Kansas because that was what was important to him. That's where he wanted to spend whatever time it was he had left. And so where hospice is concerned, we're able to give people so many things outside of just symptom management when it comes to our nausea or anxiety or pain. We're able to give them such high quality of life of all the different things, because as individuals we're all different and what we want is so different.
We here on the campus of Florida Panhandle Technical College have actually partnered with Emerald Coast Hospice and your Dream Foundation in the past. Collectively, we had a bunch of our departments restore an antique truck for a gentleman here locally who that was his dream, his wish, and as a matter of fact, I still see him around. So I don't know if he's been discharged from hospice but he seems to be doing pretty well. One can only hope that truck went a long way toward that process.
Absolutely, absolutely. Some of the curative focuses, and we've kind of already touched on that already when it comes to treatment versus curing, the disease. But some of the things that a lot of people don't understand are the different diagnoses that a person might qualify for hospice. Now, obviously, we've talked about cancer, and that is very, very prevalent, and a lot of people know with a hospice, with a cancer diagnosis that, it is tough. You endure treatments. You go through, your oncologist recommends chemotherapy, radiation, a variety of different things, and that takes an extreme toll on your body. We've actually had patients who have made the decision to come on hospice because they've been through those treatments and it's been physically exhausting for them and it's worn them out. And they made the decision to come on hospice so the hospice can help them get comfortable and then, sometimes 3-4 months down the road, they may make the decision that they want to try the treatments again. That's completely okay, because as healthcare providers and as individuals, we're never going to tell a person that they can't pursue some type of treatment, and we help and support whatever decisions they make, and that's as important in providing that quality of life as anything else that we do. When we're talking about progressive diseases, though, we're looking at diseases like congestive heart failure, COPD. One of the ones we look at a lot are dementia, Alzheimer's dementia. It is not curable. It is a disease that progresses over a number of years. And what I tell a lot of my patients who are having difficulty understanding when it comes to Alzheimer's, I compare it to when we're born and how we learn. So I compare us to a ball of yarn. And if you think about a ball of yarn being very, very small when we're first born, and just that ball of yarn, as we learn, it gets bigger and begins to wind and wind and wind as we become an adult. When you're dealing with a dementia diagnosis, we slowly start to see that ball unravel, and the things that we're capable of doing mentally, and physically start to dissipate. And that is extremely difficult for caregivers. Not only do they physically have trouble caring for them, but mentally they just don't understand. They don't know why mom, who has always cooked this recipe, cannot even remember the recipe, or why she can't use a microwave anymore, or just the simple things, or remember her children's names. So that is one of those diagnoses that a lot of people, because it takes so long to develop over time, and the symptoms are brief, and they may move into phases quickly or may not. That is one of the ones that we deal with under hospice services. Now, there obviously are Medicare guidelines, and that's where the physicians are involved, and our nurses and our nurse practitioners, to determine whether someone's eligible because of that diagnosis. But when it comes to a hospice diagnosis, again, we have to support that. And making sure we have the proper documentation. And others that we look at,
before you go on,
sure.
With the dementia, Alzheimer's, some of the toughest on the caregiver as well. Not to take anything away from people who are giving care to someone with a terminal diagnosis of any kind, but with dementia, it's a different kind. It's insidious. It's evil. It affects the caregiver just so much, because they see that person may be in physically good health, but like you say, all of the symptoms. So what I say that to say is that hospice is as much for the caregiver as it is for the patient. In my eyes, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're actually giving some respite from that 24/7, and maybe to have that caregiver get a couple hours where they can take a leisurely bath, and they can go to grocery shopping. Would that be?
Absolutely, yes. And I had a caregiver ask me one time, how do you do what you do? How do you come in to so many people's homes and do this day in and day out? And I said, what I do pales in comparison to what you do every day, because this is a 24-hour a day, 7-day-a-week thing for you. Because as you said, you really feel like you can't take your eyes off of them. When you lay your head down at night to sleep, they may decide that's the time they want to get up and go outside. They may decide that they want to go cook a meal in the middle of the night and forget that the stove is on. So, and it's frustrating because you don't understand why they are that way. Meanwhile, you're grieving the loss of the person that you once knew, and you become more the adult, and your parent or whoever you're dealing with becomes more like the child. And it is very common to have that caregiver role strain when it comes to those type of that disease especially. So being able to go in and give some relief. Our health aides can go in and help with the bath. We try to have a lot of consistency where that's concerned. If it's a patient who doesn't like new people and they like things done a certain way, we want to make sure that health aide is very familiar with that patient and they form a bond with them. And oftentimes they're the only ones that can get them to do anything after that point. And our nurses being there to support the patient and the caregivers during that time and helping them understand this is what you might see next. They may not eat as much, or they may like only sweets, or they may like, just little things that we have, as nurses have picked up along the way and that we've been trained to see when it comes to the disease.
Yeah, that part, pretty amazing, because that's not something that the physician is going to offer. No. They may offhandedly say something, or they may throw a brochure at you and say, by the way, here's what to look forward to. But wow, that to me, that would be huge, that educational part yes. on the part of the hospice worker for that caregiver.
Mm-hmm. So helping them individualize, being able to know, hey, yesterday she did this, and I didn't know that, why she did that. Why do you think she did that? Because we can individualize the number of visits where the nurses in any of our services are concerned. So we may see them 2 or 3 times a week, and the physician might see them once every 2 months. So we are that source. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we have an RN on call. So all they have to do is pick up the phone and call and ask those questions.
It's heartening, and I can't overstress the importance of that hospice worker giving the caregiver that little bit of a break, being able to look at that caregiver and say, I understand you're frustrated. That's normal. Mm-hmm. Because I would imagine that sometimes that caregiver feels guilty because they want a few minutes on their own.
Absolutely.
Or they feel guilty because they got upset at their father because he didn't remember whatever. I mean, but that hospice worker, having been through it again and again, being able to look at that caregiver, that's got to be one of the bigger parts of hospice, or as big as working with the patient, working with that caregiver.
Yeah, reassuring them that they're not alone in that. You know, that they're many times we've experienced that, and also being able to provide those respite services. You know, it's common for us to be overwhelmed, but again, have that guilt associated with it. We have social workers who do a wonderful job going in and helping the families cope, along with the nurses and the health aides. We have spiritual coordinators, and we also have volunteers. A lot of our volunteers who are people who have had experiences with a loss of a loved one, and so just to be able to sit with the caregivers and talk to them and let them know that they are not alone, that they do have someone to talk to.
And the three things you just introduced, which are the spiritual people, the volunteers, and the social workers. Up to this point, have we been just talking about medical personnel who work for hospice?
A lot of it, yes. Now, when it comes to dealing with our Dream Foundation and respite services and things like that, our social workers are, you know, just absolutely fabulous. Last minute transportation for different things. We have a great group of social workers. But again, not to discredit anything that any of our other entities do. Our chaplain services, spiritual care. And one of the myths about spiritual care is that, you know, a lot of people say, well, I'm not a very spiritual person. But what I tell my patients and what I have seen is they provide a lot of emotional support. And it's going to be on your terms. Just like our nursing care is on your terms, our health aid, anything that we do is on that person's terms. We don't go in there and tell them how to live their life and what they should and shouldn't do, because this is about them and the caregiver. And so our spiritual care coordinators do a fabulous job providing that emotional support, however it is that the patient requests that it be done.
Anytime I've been around any of your events, most recently the Veterans Day luncheon, your food drive, you depend in large part on volunteers. Talk about the part that they play. I know that's another whole show probably as far as volunteer recruitment and so forth, but would it be fair to say that you could not provide the services that you provide without those volunteers?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You know, they are such a vital part of what we do. And again, you know, we go to work every day and we do our job, but these are people who volunteer their time. They are willingly and knowingly going out to give freely and not expecting anything in return. And that in itself is amazing. And we could not do what we do without them.
Who is the average volunteer? Are they an older person retired? Are they somebody who is independently wealthy and has the time not to have to work? Who is that average?
We have anywhere from high schoolers to someone who's retired and had maybe have a loved one that they've lost themselves. But we have any number of people, men, women, as I said, teenagers, middle-aged, and also people who are just looking to get involved. And it's not necessarily just patient care. You know, they may do clerical work. They may help do a lot of our teenagers do a lot of things with our filing and helping, you know, keep records in order and things like that. So it's any number of help.
So for somebody to say, I'm not really good with people and I don't really want to be around somebody who's sick or die, there's lots for them to do.
Absolutely. Yep. We need people to help put together wheelchairs, or, you know, we oftentimes have had patients and their families will say, oh, we needed a new wash machine, but I need some help getting it in the house. Or, you know, I need some help building a wheelchair ramp, or whatever the case may be. There's, you know, a lot of men are kind of iffy about providing one-on-one conversation with patients just because they're a little uneasy, but they can task. They can do, you know, a lot of handyman work. So we absolutely need those as well.
Interesting.
Medical equipment, I just kind of touched a little bit about the wheelchair, but when there's a diagnosis of, you know, COPD, a lot of times it's difficult for that patient to get hospice or to get oxygen in the home. And so where hospice is concerned, we're able to get all of that equipment provided for them and much more.
And even changing out oxygen tanks, depending on what kind of equipment you're using.
Yep.
I mean, just doing that kind of stuff.
Yes, it's absolutely. And so just talking a little bit about, you know, different hospice services and having worked for this company a little over a year now, you know, and why we could choose Emerald Coast Hospice. Now I'll tell you, I've been in healthcare for 16 years and I'm a huge advocate for patient choice and everyone deciding, you know, again, what they need to do where their health is concerned. But I can tell you that the stories and the things that I see firsthand where our employees are concerned is just absolutely heartwarming. I honestly can say that not a single one of them don't care about what they do. It's hard when you're in healthcare because you do encounter people that maybe are perhaps in it for the money. That's not what we do in healthcare. And each and every employee that I encounter have stories and things that I know that they've done above and beyond what's even expected of them because they truly care about our patients and their families.
Yeah, a volunteer in such an organization such as hospice, that's the ultimate in service. Because like you said, there is no reward other than in your heart and being able to see that you actually are doing some good. Many times people go to work every single day and never really figure they're doing anybody any good. They're building widgets, and at the end of the day, does anybody need that microwave, But when you're working with people, it's another whole thing.
Absolutely. What
would you have to offer about Emerald Coast Hospice in particular, being in healthcare for 16 years? You've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. When you're young, you think every policeman, every postman, every doctor's a good guy, and most of them are. Not everybody has got the right kind of a heart, and unfortunately some of those people stay in those fields. I would imagine hospice is not something that you stay in if there's not some gratification and you're doing it for the right reasons. Why?
Absolutely.
Why?
You have to have reward. It's in our nature. And people, the type of reward they get or the gratification they get is different. Some people just have to have a simple pat on the back. Some people need to hear it from as in a public setting. But knowing what I know about the employees that go to work each and every day with Emerald Coast Hospice, it is truly amazing. And it's not just the employees that work with me, the case managers and things of that nature. It's right on up. I've seen so many times that our supervisors and powers that be give us the opportunity to provide and to give back well beyond, honestly, any company that I've ever worked for. Being able to go out and give back to the community and knowing that you're allowing your employees to do that. And again, just using the food drive, for example, or the veterans cookout. It's costly to a company to let that many employees do something, but they realize and recognize how important it is for us to provide that service to our community, and they allow us to do that. And to me, that just speaks volumes.
Is there anything that we haven't touched upon when it comes to Hospice 101?
I think we pretty much covered it. When it comes to understanding the diagnosis and what medications are covered, that gets kind of tricky. A lot of people don't always understand that. But for any questions, we have a Mariana and a Chipley office. We cover a vast number of counties. For our Mariana office, Chris Milton is our hospice specialist, and the number he can be reached at is 850-526-3577. And over at our Chipley office is Amanda Harkrider. She's our hospice specialist, and her number is 850-638-8787.
Both of those numbers on the screen right now. Wow, what do you say? Truly a labor of love, truly a passion. It's a calling. You have to be built for it. You have to have the kind of heart and the service mentality, the service spirit to be able to deal with all of that. Thanks for all that you guys do.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on today. But as we mentioned before, hopefully you'll come on a regular basis or irregular basis. I know that you mentioned briefly in the pre-show that death and dying and grief and some of those other subjects are things which we can talk about in future episodes, and we look forward to that. So again, thank you very much. Thanks for Emerald Coast Hospice in general allowing you in the community to do this education. I would dare say that obviously you help the overall awareness and you help the sales, if you will. At the end of the day, you have to pay your bills, and so you have to recruit patients for hospice, and you're not the only hospice around. There are lots of people providing those kinds of services over the tri-county area, or the tri-state area certainly. But to have a dedicated person, and dedicated in two ways. This is your job, so you're dedicated to that task, but I can tell just talking to you that you are dedicated to hospice and all that it entails. So good job, and keep up that good work. And thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
Our guest today has been Sunshine Speers with Emerald Coast Hospice, talking about just that, Hospice 101. There's more information on the website. You can also call either of the numbers on the screen, depending on if you're closer to Marianna or to Chipley, Florida. Hopefully, Sunshine will be back again soon. Other members of our organization have come on in the past talking about Emerald Coast Hospice. Hopefully, you've learned something, as I have from this show, as I do from every show. And next time they come, maybe you can learn even more. We'll be right back.